Hello and welcome to Deep In Pact, a proud member of the Doof Network where we dive deep into Wildbow's most shortest work, 5 years on. Coming up next is Elliot Diebold.
And that, as always, was Ruben Morehouse.
And I, as always, am back to talk about Judgment 16.4. So, let's talk about it, Elliot. There's a lot of stuff that happens in this chapter, so we should just get stuck into it.
Yeah, this one's a doozy.
Last chapter obviously ended with Rose and elder sister inviting in Mrs. Lewis, and in she walks at the start of this chapter, and Rose kind of feels the weight of everybody responding or not responding to her bid. She's offered to let anybody go if they just hand over Rose, basically.
Yeah, and I mean, really, the first, 10 paragraphs here are just dedicated to helping us feel how monumental this is, especially for Rose.
Yeah.
Just all the stuff that goes on. Like, there's a bit where Miss Lewis sort of gets the vibe that everybody's not jumping at her offer of escape, and she's like, I can swear an oath. And Rose comments that not a soul responded.
Yeah.
And there's lots of little things like that phrasing of not a soul rather than nobody.
Yeah, that's so
it just
perfect.
makes it feel so much more heavy.
Yeah. I love that. It didn't tweak for me, but of course, the fact that they're describing that their souls didn't respond is obviously very important.
It's very relevant imagery for sure.
Yeah, and you're right. The start of this chapter is just setting up the tension in this room. Like there's maybe one or two sentences uttered in the first 10 paragraphs. And the effect of that is that we, as the audience, are in Rose's head here. We're in this position of kind of desperately hoping that nobody speaks up, and they don't.
Yeah. And obviously, it's all framed around this metaphor Rose starts to build of the candles in the church, or just as she notes, they're not real candles. They're those candles, and I mean, I saw these a lot growing up. The plasticky ones that basically have a little light bulb.
Yep.
And so while they kind of look like candles and they give off the light of candles, obviously they're not. They're so much more still, and when you look at them, you realize that they're not real candles. And obviously, Rose is tying that to a lot of things going on right now.
Yes, the comparison between Mrs. Lewis and these candles is great, right? Because they're kind of the illusion of life, but it's actually plastic and fake.
Yes, and of course, we know as of 15.x that Mrs. Lewis is fake as shit.
Yep.
When it comes to acting like a human. Rose finally found a human that's less human than she is, so that's nice.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. So Mrs. Lewis and Rose kind of have a bit of a back and forth in this conversation where they're both trying to basically make big, bold statements that everyone will just agree with, so they agree with their side.
Yeah, and I feel like the big bit here for me was when Miss Lewis sort of gives her speech where she's like, well, I just hope everyone remembers that when their life is going to shit, you're the one who brought them here, and you're the one who did this. Like, if they just gave me you, it'd all be okay. And Rose doesn't even challenge it at all.
Well, yeah, it is true. It's obviously true.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing here is and the real reason this jumped out to me is Rose sort of thinks, yeah, Blake would be fighting this because there's obviously an argument to be made, and Rose has made this argument already about how this was always coming, and Blake would probably hit this front on and be like, no, that's not entirely true, blah blah blah. And whereas Rose just sort of absorbs the blow and is just like, don't pretend you weren't gunning for Faisal and the barber this whole time. And it does work so much better. And I just love that as not only is it a real badass moment, but the way, it's also doing character work with Rose and Blake and Rose's perception of Blake. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's kind of just occurring to me now that this whole conversation is kind of a political debate, right? And you don't win debates by kind of squabbling over the minor details of incidents. Obviously, you exude confidence and you talk about big, bold strokes. And Blake is exactly the kind of person that would dive into the little squabble to not lose a point. And by not losing a point, he would lose, the faith of the gathered people.
Yeah, and isn't that Blake and Rose in a nutshell? Blake is short-term focused, and Rose is thinking about the big picture, and that's exactly what she does here. And again, she reads the room here. This is something we talked about a lot last chapter as well, and it's going to come up a lot this chapter. Rose and her ability to interact with the human people is sort of something that she's been struggling with.
Yeah.
And this is an example of where she kind of nails it. She sort of sees that the way to win this argument isn't to squabble, but to just sort of take a step back and very casually and succinctly undermine Miss Lewis's argument indirectly.
Yeah, it's interesting because this is one of the first explicit cases where Rose has done better to make a bridge between people. Like, I guess it's more, maybe it's because it is a bit more manipulative than like vulnerable, which Rose has always been better at.
Yeah. I don't know. I think there's maybe some other subtle signs that she's getting better at this as the chapter goes, but we'll just keep track of those as we go, I guess.
Yeah. I do love the style of Rose making these huge, bold statements like, no, we are declaring war, when obviously, if anybody challenges that at any point, that statement is completely fucked. And she knows that they are quite close to challenging it and is just kind of hoping that no one actually does.
Yeah. I mean, you feel like this is on a razor's edge the whole time Miss Lewis is here.
Yeah. And Mrs. Lewis does some good kind of positioning in this argument as well. She makes a good play where she kind of positions staying in the church as the first step towards siding with her already, so that inaction becomes, passively her win rather than Rose's. And it doesn't quite work, but it is a good strategy, and it does set up, yes, Mrs. Lewis knows how to tango in this way as well.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, Miss Lewis kind of leaves with the old, all we want is Rose, dead or alive. And there's like this implication that that would be the end of it. And
yes.
Of course, just after she leaves, Rose is like, so yeah, like just in case anybody had any doubts, like that's obviously bullshit, right?
Yeah.
Which was like a great moment.
Yeah, my favorite bit is as soon as Mrs. Lewis leaves, Rose exhales, checks that no one's just shot her, and then turns around and starts continuing.
Yeah, and especially I love the little, just like the injection of kind of like the humor of fantasy settings where it's like, okay, so I've been shot with bullets or a bolt of lightning.
Yep. Which is probably more likely considering elder sister.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just, I don't know. I just really enjoyed that sort of, like, I like it when, it felt to me like a way of framing some of this fantasy setting and just highlighting how absurd it can be, like, relative to the real world.
Yeah.
It's just fun.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we're really we know enough of the world that we can really just have these little jokes that land so perfectly because we've been immersed in this world for, a year and a half.
Yeah, exactly. Like, the thought of having to worry about somebody shooting you with lightning is just so hilariously ridiculous, but also, in this context, completely sensible. I also, obviously, something that comes up right after Miss Lewis leaves is Mags. I mean, Rose seems to have gotten to Mags is basically what happens next is Mags compares all this to what Johannes was saying and Johannes's domain. And, obviously this is great because it shows us that Mags is on side, which is useful for a bunch of reasons. And just the way she ties it to Johannes, I think it makes sense because we learned a lot of that stuff with Mags. And also tying Johannes and what he was doing feels very important because what's been really getting set up the last few chapters is taking down Fazol Barbahana's.
That flows off the tongue.
Seems to be what this is going to come down to. Like they are, the sort of MacGuffin-y thing. If you can take them out, or switch their sides or whatever, that's going to turn the tide. And so tying it to what Johannes was doing feels like that's the seed of something.
Yeah, I absolutely love, by the way, that we've had basically 3 different types of big bad that have been set up over the course of this story, and now they're all just kind of meshed into one entity that is the ultimate villain. It works so well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously at the core of it is the barber, but he's tapped into the power of these other things. Like he's presumably running the domain. Like God, when they get in there, like what the fuck's it going to be? Is there going to be one Fazal? There might be multiple Fazals.
Yep.
Fuck knows whatever else in the domain that might have brothers and sisters now.
Yeah.
It's gonna be very fun.
Yeah, could literally be anything. So I want to talk on this. So you pulled out this line. Where Rose talks about recognizing theatrics for what they are, respecting the power of believing that you can accomplish something. And you put a little joke here, which I liked.
I just said it was hard to believe that was written before 2016.
Yes, because obviously the idea of theatrics. I mean, this is kind of what I want to talk about, right? Is we talked about last chapter. We talked about kind of the like hopefulness, the belief in the ability of humans to make things better. That this
Yeah,
work seems to be exhibiting. And we touched upon the idea of the kind of political nature of theatrics and even how the start of this chapter feels like a political debate. And it's interesting. I wouldn't call this Wildbow's most political work because Ward has some more overt political references, right? And this is a bit
yeah,
of spoilers if you haven't read Ward, so skip the next 15 seconds or so. But, specifically the anti-parahuman sentiment being kind of this xenophobic rhetoric kind of stuff.
yeah,
But I really like how much the world of Pact supports exploring these political themes. I think it's something that isn't leveraged to do to talk about many political ideas in Pact, but there's so many interesting systems in Pact that lend themselves to political parallels. I'd be really interested to see more political stuff in Pact 2 if that ever happens.
I think something that's driven every level of Pact that we maybe haven't called out as explicitly as a theme as maybe we should have is I think one of the core things you can say about Pact is it's about imbalances in power.
Yes.
And so naturally that just lends itself to like political tie-ins and stuff like that because it's obviously, dealing with the same sort of issues.
Yes, but the thing I love about it is, yes, of course, it's about imbalance of power and like these old systems that rule the world. But also, it's so clearly about humans. A gathering of humans has the ability to change the world around them tangibly, and that's such a beautiful like political metaphor.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Rose even sort of calls it out in the original line. Her next thing after saying you just need to respect the power of believing you can accomplish something
Yeah,
is her saying I can't even express how important that is.
yeah,
And I mean that's basically Wildbow just writing down, hey, like this is very important to the story because it's Pact, so it's also important in the story.
yeah.
And yeah, I mean, and again, because it's so Blake. I mean, I think in my live read, I highlighted this sentence and just wrote Blake.txt because that's what he's been doing all
Yes.
book, and now this is sort of at the end, things are coming together, and it's sort of saying, hey, this is kind of what matters here.
Yeah. Yeah, Blake's defining feature has really been his stubborn belief that he can change his destiny.
Yeah, he's just unwillingness to accept the shitty situation he was in. He was like, no, fuck you, I can fix this.
Yeah, it's great. I love it. And I would love to see more of explicitly political themes explored through these kind of systems. But we'll see. That's a conversation for another day, I think.
Yes.
Back in the actual story of Pact, Rose starts putting together her hit squad of the ace people from each team.
Yeah, I mean, this is very fun. I love big team up stuff like this. I was a huge supporter of the first Avengers film for sort of starting to bring stuff together. And I think it's why I love long form storytelling. Like we've talked about how we both sort of gravitate towards these longer form stories. And this is another reason is you can lay out so much history that then we get things like this delivered on. Like this is some stuff that's been getting seeded since the start of the book, these relationships between characters.
Yeah.
And it feels so good to start to see that come together. Like, and Wildbow takes it like a level further than is necessary. Like, I think the easy answer would have been to have like someone like Sandra on this team, but instead we get Lola, which is like a setup that's been much more undercurrent, and it feels even cooler when it happens.
Yes.
Ainsley, similarly, like she felt like such a left field choice. Like I was instantly like, oh well, Alistair's going to be here.
Yeah.
And Alistair's like, no, actually, I'm more useful here. And then Ainsley just stepped up, and I was like, shit, I didn't see that coming, but I'm here for it.
Yep. And of course, if Ainsley on the squad, Peter's going to be on the squad too.
Yeah, I knew you'd focus on their little interaction a bit later.
The other thing is, it's interesting, is she's obviously getting like one person from each camp, right? And she doesn't end up taking anybody from the Sisters of the Torch, which I think possibly would have been quite a hard sell. But
yeah,
and I also she never explicitly calls this out in her narration, like, yes, I'll get one person from each camp. But it's such a great play of her in order to like make it so that people are less willing to betray her. Like it's a good little piece of insurance. I quite like it.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen from in Arc 13 when Blake was hanging out with the satyrs and stuff that it doesn't always help.
Yes, true.
Uh, but yeah, you're right. Like again, it's one of those things. Like this world is so great because it's kind of been set up that it is important in world for Rose to kind of have people representing every group.
Yeah.
And the way she does this is by just having Paige represent all of Toronto,
Yeah,
which
which is a
is
bit of a
yeah,
a bit reductionist.
maybe fair, maybe not. I guess we'll see how it goes. But yeah, it's really fun watching her start to piece together, especially because the bit where she chooses Peter is so perfectly written.
Yeah.
Like, because we're led into it. Like Rose is thinking on all this, and she sort of thinks, okay, so I have a Bahame, and I have a Duchamp, and I have a Torontian, and do I need someone for the Thorburns? And then Peter just speaks up and says something offensive. I can't even remember what, and you just instantly like, oh, you fucking idiot, Peter! Like
Yep.
you've done it now.
Yep. Yeah, it's really good, isn't it? And it makes perfect sense because if you have to pick a Thorburn, Peter is the obvious choice, right? And Rose kind of
Absolutely.
walked through how basically everybody else has to be excluded. But of course, not just a good choice logically, but narratively, Peter is the perfect choice because he's been the most active Thorburn. He clearly fits the most into this world, and also his dynamic with Ainsley is hilarious.
And Paige. I mean, that's going to be
And Paige, yes, that's true.
Like all three of them are probably going to be hilarious.
What a combo!
Moving forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny because the other Thorburn I would have thought is maybe a consideration would have been Roxanne because like she's proven herself useful as a potential assassin.
Yes.
But Rose does draw a line at bringing young people because she looks at Emily, like Fell's niece,
Yeah.
and is like, it probably isn't right to bring someone that young, and then follows that thought up with, because young people are unreliable.
Yep.
That's like, oh, Rose, you were so close.
She's almost got
so
there,
close.
hasn't she? Yeah.
It's just I had a good laugh at Rose's logical thinking there.
She's logicked her way to morals.
Yeah, and especially because I think right after this, she looks at Ty and sort of is like, oh fuck, like I care about these people, and she's a little bit frustrated at this because it's a distraction, which is like maybe a little bit true. Like I'm finding this. I'm just loving Rose's head so much. Like watching her basically starting to learn to cope with feelings. Since now Blake has given her the capacity to feel good feelings about people. It's really fun to follow this stuff as she's coming to grips with it.
Yes, her evolution into a full human is quite interesting. So Rose kind of looks over her group and thinks, yes, this is looking like a pretty good kill squad. And at this point, Blake seeds an idea in her head. The Abyss isn't just destruction and ruin.
Yeah, and I think this leads her to exactly where Blake was aiming, which is, of course, like, how could you forget Green Eyes? First of all, it's a murder squad. She's very good at that.
She
I don't know why
is the best murderer.
But also, I mean, Blake started to make friends with Alistair. It's only fair that she returns the favor.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, we talked about this a lot last episode, so I'll try and skim over it. But obviously, the Abyss has come up here as and Blake specifically calls back to the idea that it's maybe a force of change, rather than just destruction. And yeah, like that's going to have to be important going forward. I feel like the Abyss is going to be a player in this hit squad in a very tangible way because it's been so important to the story. It fits right in with this concept of change. I can't think of exactly how it's going to be, but I feel like the Abyss is going to be sort of the final play.
Thinking about it, like we talked about the idea of how they're losing each of their resources one by one, and the Abyss has been the thing that is a constant in their lives, like constantly interacting with them, constantly making its presence known to them, I suppose. And we also know that it hasn't deserted them. If anything, the links between them have gotten stronger because Rose pledged her practicing to it, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I agree with you. I think we're definitely going to see it come back in a tangible way.
Yeah, and I mean also as well, it seems like the lawyers just went and fetched, Barbatorum and Johannes out of the Abyss, which it tends to not really be a fan of letting things go, historically. So, like, I think it might also be on side just because it probably wants its stuff back.
Yeah.
So maybe, yeah. I don't know. I can't sort of wait to see how the Abyss slots in to being a part of how this goes, but I'm almost certain it's going to be.
So the other thing that this obviously brings up is Green Eyes and her connection to Rose. And Rose kind of thinks about what the motivation of Blake asking for Green Eyes to come along here is. I quite like the idea that Blake is getting Green Eyes to come along just as a bit of insurance that he's not going to get totally fucked over, because Green Eyes is basically the one person, Evan kind of, but Green Eyes even more aggressively so, the one person who will always fight to for his rights, you know?
Yeah. I mean, Rose and Blake have been getting on so well. I want to have more faith that Blake wouldn't think he'd need that.
Yeah.
But then also Rose does have the thought here that, Green Eyes will kill me the second Blake's out. Is that why he's bringing her? And I was just like, God damn it, Rose. Like, we've been on such a streak, and now you're having, like, paranoid, combative thoughts about Blake again.
Yep.
Yeah. Again, I feel like this is going to be very fun moving forward.
Yeah.
Talking about the Abyss wanting Barbatorum and Johannes back, it might still be harboring feelings about losing Blake as well. I don't know. I can't wait for them to actually get into, like, I assume they're still heading for Johannes's domain. And, we know that the Abyss loves domains. Maybe got its hooks in when Johannes was down there. I think this is going to be very fun. What's happening in this domain with maybe the Abyss's hooks and a demon running the show.
Yeah, we'll have to see. So Rose has put together her Avengers, and elder sister basically at this point questions whether they have a plan, and Rose kind of hobbles together enough of something. Yeah, exactly. But to the rescue again, Evan, who does have a plan.
Oh boy, and we'll get there in a sec.
Yeah.
But just before we get there, I love this little moment where elder sister's like, "Yeah, you seem to know the lawyers pretty well," and Rose just thinks, "Yeah, I basically picture what Blake and I would do and take away the intrinsic want to do good, and that's pretty much the lawyers." It's such a fun thought. I mean, it's always great writing when you're like, protagonist and antagonist mirror each other in a lot of ways, and this is obviously like just a summary of how Blake and Rose are like this for the lawyers. Like, they do sort of think like diabolists in a way, and that's being shown here.
Well, they are diabolists.
That's true, actually. Yeah, good point.
So I want to touch on Evan having a plan, because he brings it up, and obviously he's brought this up so many times, and so Rose and Tiff both immediately automatically dismiss him, which is like, maybe fair.
It's just a habit. But it feels like they're just doing it habitually at first.
Yeah, totally. And then Lola kind of is like, no, wait, he's a part of this. Like, let's hear him out. and it's just kind of like, oh yeah, Evan actually can have good ideas. It's actually like come to the point where this is a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like, the second Lola sort of stood up for him, I was like, oh fuck, we're doing this. And this has been something that has been getting like seated in our heads for arcs and arcs. So my expectations were monumentally high, and so far they have been absolutely met. Like, this is one of those things where a good chunk of the book has been dedicated to seeding the idea for this in our heads. So it was like big shoes to fill.
Yeah. So we do a bit of a time jump to not reveal it too early, which is perfect. Rose and Alistair kind of peek outside the doors and then unleash Firebird Evan.
Yeah, I've taken to calling him the Ev in my notes because that just feels big. I mean, I don't know. Like, let's just pack up the podcast here. Surely it's all downhill from here.
Well, all I want from this story is Firebird Evan and Peter and Ainsley's relationship. So if that's just what we focus on from now on, I'm happy.
But like, obviously this Evan transformation scene is fucking fantastic. The way he's like gleefully giggling as he gets bigger, and like Rose notes it's getting like lower and lower. Like, you can just picture it being one of those like audio effects they do where they just kind of cheaply lower the pitch and add echo, and like Evan's laughter is just kind of getting like hoo 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 hoo. Like, I'd almost want it done in that kind of cheap and simple way rather than anything more clever. Like, I always pictured it exactly like, what happens to Galadriel's voice in that scene in Fellowship of the Ring where she kind of wigs out for a second.
Yeah.
In fact, let's just get in Pact's visual thing. Kate Blanchett can voice Evan.
Yeah, I can see
for the whole story, just so we can reuse that effect for when she turns into like the Ev.
Yeah, so the Ever's here, but obviously there's a big threat that's out here, right?
Yeah. I mean, as we said, like Rose and Alistair peek outside, and there's some crazy shit with the demons here that like I just kind of immediately left my brain. Like when I was reading this the second time for the notes, I was like, oh yeah, there's those demons there. I forgot because I kind of got so blown away by like, the rise of the Ev.
Yeah, this is the thing about it, right? Is we've talked about how we as the audience are basically the spirits, right? And I think this is a good sign. The fact that Evan's Firebird transformation is powerful and important enough to overshadow the horrifying demons that are out there. If it can overshadow them for us as the audience, that means it can overshadow them for the spirits. And so,
Yeah.
Evan, that's kind of the book, in my mind, signaling to us, yes, this might actually be enough to help them out of this situation.
Yeah. To do something. Yeah, you're right. Because like there's one demon, and like the second time I read this, I was like, oh my god, how did I forget this? Where it's like just like some cubes with like torn flesh between them, and I was just like there's something. Obviously we've seen so many demons that are horrible and gross in all these various ways, and then there's just this one that's just kind of weird flesh in cubes, and I was just like, somehow this is like a whole new level of existential dread in demon form. It was such a uniquely horrifying form for a demon. I really liked it.
Yeah, it's definitely very strange. A very strange demon. I'm excited to see what kind of type of horror it manifests. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Firebird Evan goes out and attacks, and everyone kind of rushes out, knowing that this is their chance to get themselves out of this corner that they're backed into. But unfortunately, the lawyers have a plan. Basically, a demon screams, and Rose feels her sanity slipping away. And her last coherent thought is, "Oh, of course they're going to try and push us back in. My mistake was assuming they'd give us a choice in the matter."
Yeah, because something we kind of skipped over, but earlier on they established that they're going to try and break out, and if the lawyers can force them back in, that's kind of game over.
Yeah, that's enough to kill their momentum completely.
Exactly. So the whole idea with this push out is that they can't let themselves get forced back in. And yeah, obviously Rose sort of has the thought of, oh yeah, they might just use a demon to kind of make it happen.
Yeah.
Whoopsie.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be great. I got my fingers crossed that because Blake is one step removed from Rose's faculties, he's still in there, and we might get to jump back into Blake's perspective as he tries to piece Rose's sanity back together or steer her in the right direction. That could be really fun. Watching him try to control her insanity and steer her in the right direction, like from inside of her. I don't know. I think that'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it sounds interesting. Yeah, it's definitely a situation of they had this small amount of hope with Evan, and it's kind of being dashed a bit. We even see Firebird Evan falling out of the sky. But we'll see how everything goes down next time.
Yeah, well, because sorry to interrupt the ending, but like something else is Evan narrowly escapes capture by the lawyers twice. Yeah. And of course, like that's when Blake chimes in to sort of tell Rose, hey, that's like he can't do this a third time. So just as you're like, okay, now we need to do the next maneuver, then suddenly they all get hit by the insanity demon, which has weird skin clothing stuff. just as an aside.
Yep. Just as a little horrifying aside. But that's the end of Judgment 16.4, but not the end of our show, because it's time for us to dive back in and talk more about demons.
Yeah, we're going to go over the discussion question that everyone wrote some great answers to over the last week, which was, in what kind of situations is it okay to use demons?
Yes. So, of course, we got a few answers that were no, never, don't ever do it, ever, never.
Yeah, I've labelled this the list of good people.
Yes, so congratulations, good people.
Yeah, so there was Bigo Miko, Bisexual Punts Party, and Ripper1337.
Yes, there were some others that said things along similar lines, but we want to dive into some of them a bit more detailed.
Yeah, there was also like another list which I've titled the "Know You" people, who was basically a common trend we got were people who are answering with just the only time you can sort of morally justify it is if somebody is about to send like a bigger, worser demon at you, you try and get in there first.
Yeah, I think Farm Fresh Hornets, one of these users, summed it up in the best way, which was demons don't just do bad shit, they fuck with the order of things, So any time you're using a demon is so bad because it's not just you or your friends or your family that's getting fucked over, it's everybody for all time, always. So the only time that's ever even possibly okay is if there's worse damage being dealt to every single human forever.
Yeah, basically letting a demon express itself is taking from the universe.
Yes.
So the only reason to take is to ensure that less is taken overall.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think Awesome Toast and Nameless 218 were the other two who sort of had similar thoughts.
Yep.
We got a great response from Captain Rhino, who listed out like a bunch of kind of hilarious scenarios where it would be okay. I've pulled out my personal highlights, which include if you're in a situation where you're a Diabolist and your enemies think you're going to pull out a super powerful demon, so you pull out a teeny one just to mess with them.
Great.
Yeah. There's also, if you sail a boat out to Point Nemo, which is this point in the Pacific Ocean that's like, essentially the middle of nowhere, and you just try to summon every demon you know and stick them in that part of the ocean so everyone else can't use them for a while.
Yeah, good strategy.
Yeah. So yeah, just there are a bunch of other ones there, like pit a third choir demon against some seventh choir imps to see who would win.
Or a demon fight club, yeah.
Yeah, or a third choir demon versus 4 seventh choir imps, but if the seventh choir imps had 4 days to prepare, all this classic who would win type restrictions. It was very funny.
Yeah, solid stuff. One answer that was one of the few answers where I was actually kind of like, yeah, I could use a demon in this way, was from Beard of Valor. So Beard of Valor touches on the idea that there are demons, weaker demons especially, that aren't just about destruction. We've seen demons that are focused on things like incest, that have their kind of domain that they specialize in. And so Beard of Valor talks about how you can use some demons to fuck people over without necessarily killing or destroying them, just kind of doing some horrible things to them that will cause them a lot of pain and torment. And it's kind of like,
that's arguably worse, but
sure,
I get what you're saying.
Yeah, but it's like it's not necessarily a explode the world to do your damage kind of deal. You can use more specifically targeted knives,
Yeah, I would argue that in the world of Pact, like these things being labeled as demonic would suggest that it is as destructive in some way. Like to take the incest example.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen some examples of where incest can go in the world with Midge, and it does seem to take as much as it changes from people in this world. So, like, I don't know. I think it's maybe just that's falling into the trap of thinking the more abstract choirs are doing less damage when maybe they're not.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
I also liked Haunt of the Heron gave us this answer, which kind of they set up like a series of guidelines as to like building a scenario where it's okay to use demons. And so the sort of 3 rules were you don't have any other solutions, like you can't think of anything else that will help. The stakes are high enough to kind of justify the damage it does to the universe, and that you get your shit together and you do it properly, like know what you're doing, don't just try and wing it. And like Haunt of the Heron brings up that like in Rose Senior's case, she actually does hit all 3 of those markers, so maybe like hers was a good scenario of when it is maybe okay to use a demon. Which I liked as like tying, like just as an example of something in this discussion question, is saying, hey, I mean, here's an example in the book where I think you could make an argument that Rose Senior did a smart thing, and my system backs that up. So, maybe there's something to it.
Yeah, that's something that I didn't see that much discussion of outside of this response was Rose Senior did use a demon, and it has been seemingly in an altruistic way, and a way that, well, we don't know how it's really going to wrap up. There was at least a solid idea there behind how it would be successful.
Yeah, and like, like obviously it was pretty rough on people like Blake and Rose. Like, they didn't have a good time out of it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's going to come into anything that you have to say here and what the story will say about stuff like this. But, especially if they win here, it's going to be kind of indisputable that there was some level of success to what Rose Senior did. So, how okay does that make it? Like, I think that's, a very cauldron type argument that people could make.
I want to also pull out Juanson's answer here, which was basically, if you have nothing else to lose, go for it. Which I like. It's a very simplified version of, like, legit, you've got nothing left? Okay, well, fine,
Yeah. We got like a very sort of heartfelt and genuine answer from Hashirama Cells, who was saying like they have family in Cameroon, which is like currently like in the middle of a civil war,
Yeah.
and their family was like dealing with some of the hardships there. And Hashirama was just sort of saying they would absolutely make some sort of deal with a demon if it helped them get their family out safe, like, which, you know, is a very understandable sort of situation to be in, where you make that long-term sacrifice to you know, get through something that sounds absolutely awful.
Yeah, and they talked about, you know, specifically they called out a cost that they'd be totally fine with paying as a cup of flayed skin, which is pretty horrifying. But again, when you're in a situation that, I guess, that desperate, you know, why wouldn't you pay that cost?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And Sahaibamum 7 kind of talked about that as well, where they sort of mentioned they went back through Black Lamb's Blood to answer this question and realized that, like, as like a reader reading this book, it's very easy for us to sort of sit here and be like, well, demons are obviously awful and you should
Yeah.
never use it.
Yeah.
But if you were in this world and you knew something about some of the demons and you could see the benefits as well as the cost, which is usually, I mean, this is how they get you. The costs can often be a little bit more abstract or long
Yeah.
term. So Hybrim 7 was like, yeah, you know what? I actually might fall for it, which, you know, is probably the page I'm on as well.
Yeah, I could totally see myself thinking that this deal sounded like the costs sound pretty bad, and then there's other costs that you don't think about. So you're kind of like, okay, yeah, the costs are bad, but I can put up with a cup of flayed skin or whatever it is, you know, or smelling burnt stuff for the rest of my life. Like, it's a shitty trade-off, but I can do it. And then suddenly you realize, no, there's actually this whole other world of cost that you didn't even know about. It's a very easy trick to fall into.
Yeah, like with demons, I could totally see it being a thing where it's like you give Barbatorum a cup of flayed skin and then that skin doesn't grow back or some shit. Like it's not just going to be, oh, you know, this will hurt for a couple of months and then I'll be fine. Like there's going to be some trick, but you may not necessarily be the sort of person who knows enough to always think about that in this world.
Yeah, totally. A lot of interesting answers. So thanks for everyone who left an answer to our discussion question. Well done.
Yeah, and so with that, we move into our next discussion question, which we'll be discussing answers for in 16.6's episode.
Mm-hmm.
And the discussion question we've gone for is pick an other and an element and explain what might happen to them if they got super juiced on it. And, you know, got the same treatment that Evan has just gotten.
Yeah, so Evan's obviously got a whole helping full of fire spirits injected into his veins, and he's turned into Firebird Evan. And I'm kind of interested to hear what others would have if they got, you know, a bunch of metal injected into them, or any other element, or even something a bit more abstract than a traditional element.
Yeah, like you could even pick a dimension of the practice and say, like, you know, what would happen if Alistair poured all of his chronomancy, you know, time built up into Evan? Like, you know,
what would a green eyes time mermaid look like?
Yeah, exactly. Like, there's some really fun combos you could do here. I mean, even a simple one would be like, what if Evan but water? You know, like that'd be
as
sort of
cathartic. I don't think.
No, I like go wild with it, I reckon. But you know, I can't tell you what to do. So, yeah, you know, pick any sort of element or dimension to the practice and think about what it might do to them if they got like an absolutely massive serving of it.
Yeah. So I guess while we're at the end of this episode, I want to pull in a comment that was left by a user in our 16.2 discussion thread. This was a user called Lunaix. Is that right?
Lunix? I'm not sure.
A user called Linux. And they were basically talking about this realization that they had about how the lawyers are kind of a dark reflection of the Seal of Solomon. Which, so, you know, the Seal of Solomon kind of injects order into this world, and the lawyers are kind of doing a similar thing, but specifically focused on demons, and how the lawyers as a power structure might have even come about directly as a result of the Seal of Solomon, and how they might be subtly kind of influencing and kind of eroding the order of the world through their dealings and stuff. And it's a great comment. It's a long one, so I'll leave you people to read it themselves, but it's just a really interesting one. It really got your brain working.
Yeah, I actually didn't encounter this till after I'd read 16.3, which of course ended with that whole change, you know, third dimension type aspect to humanity.
Mm.
And like I love how this train of thought starts to slot in that direction. Like if the Seal of Solomon was humanity organizing and trying to change things, once they'd established that, the idea that demons could work to corrupt and destroy that idea by creating the lawyers is a fantastic extension of it.
Yeah.
I really liked where this had my head go.
Yeah, it was very cool.
And in fact, like just while we're talking somewhat about this, like we talked in 16.3 about like how becoming a practitioner tied into the concept of humanity as the agents of change. And we weren't quite sure exactly what it was. And sort of just after that, like I had the thought of becoming a practitioner is about changing your humanity. Like we've seen that so much. Like you become a practitioner and you become a bit more other and you basically change what it is to be human. And I mean, of course, that's what humans do because they're about change. And like, what sort of agent of change would you be if you don't try and change yourself?
Yeah.
So like, I love this idea of the practice being humans changing themselves as much as they're changing everything else. Like you can't just hold this ideal of humanity as stagnant. Like when your whole thing is that you're trying to evolve the universe.
Yeah, definitely. Even to the extent where they can change themselves into demons, like being a diabolist, then being a lawyer, you're basically taking steps towards becoming some kind of demonic entity.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. That's the thing Pact has made very clear. Sometimes change is good, sometimes it's not. It's change isn't unidirectional. It's a bit of a crapshoot, and you just got to try and hope that you can do most of it in the good direction as much as you can.
Yeah. I guess that's the end of our episode. So leave us your thoughts on what you thought of Judgment 16.4 or on our new discussion question. Again, what happens if you juice up another, basically is the concise version. You can leave your thoughts on that in our discussion thread, which will be linked in the show notes down below.
Yes, and if you want to learn more about the other shows on the Doof Media Network, head on over to doofmedia.com. There's, Kingslingers was the shiny new podcast of Doof Media, and it's still great. But we actually have an exciting announcement for those of you who haven't heard already. We Want More, which is a podcast doing the We've Got Worm treatment on Harry Potter and the methods of rationality.
Yep.
Has just joined the Doof Network, so we're all very excited for that.
Yes. We've talked about HP More a bunch on the Discord, and we talked about it on MediaMD. It's a great story and one that I think is very interesting, especially if you're a fan of Walbo style stories. So if you haven't checked it out, check out We Want More and see if you want to, dive into the story with them.
Yes, ever since we touched on it in MediaMD years ago, and I read like one chapter, I've been meaning to find an excuse to go back and start it, and now I finally have.
Yep.
So I'm very excited to get into this. Yeah.
And that's why we brought it on the network, Elliot, just so you could go back and read.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
If you want to support all of these great shows like Kingslingers, like We Want More, like all of the great shows in the Doof Media Network, you can become a patron. Head on over to patreon.com/Doof Media. There's a bunch of cool perks and rewards that you can get for supporting us on Patreon, and the best place to find out about those is on patreon.com/Doof Media.
Yeah. Obviously, one of those perks is you get to vote in all the contests Doof runs. And something else we should mention is that the voting is now open for the Doof the Right Thing competition that closed last week. So, you can, if you're a patron, you get to go on and you get to read all the stories, which is like...
Yeah, pretty good.
It's amazing.
Reward.
Yeah, you get to choose which ones are your favorites. And not only is there a buttload of them, they're like insanely good. Like you can really see how much... like improvement there is when you get to go back and edit what you chuck out in half an hour. So it's like it feels like that evolution of the Do the Right Thing format, and I've been really enjoying the stories that I've read.
Yeah, definitely. Find out more about that on our Patreon. And hey, while you're on Patreon, why don't you check out Wildbow's Patreon, patreon.com/Wildbow, because he makes all this cool stuff because people give him money. It's like a deal with the devil, but good. So go do it.
Yeah, there's no secret underbelly to this deal. He just keeps writing the stories. I suppose that depends which character dies. That's that's Wildbow's
so if you want your favorite characters to survive, go and back him on Patreon.
So apart from that, we'll see everyone on Friday, the 7th of February, as we dive into Judgment 16.5.
Bye.